Consumed. Westlake Trilogy Book 1 by J.C. Jarrett. The goblins still eyed the humans wearily, even though the chieftain had declared them friends of the goblins and honorary tribe members. As they walked through the village, Peyton explained the events that had transpired while she was unconscious, how his father had saved the goblin that later became the chief, and how he said that he owed the man a life debt that he would pay now by helping his son and his female. "So I'm your female," Elisa said, looking at Peyton, who caught the hint of a smile on her lips. Even though he knew she was just poking fun at him, Peyton stopped, taking her gently by the arm. "Elisa, as long as I live, you will never be anybody's property ever again," he said with great conviction in his voice. The young woman looked at him, seeing the truth of his words in his eyes. She knew that he needed no response and waited for none as they walked on their fingers interlaced together as they traveled hand in hand. Arriving at the chieftain's hut, the couple were allowed to pass the guards being expected. Ducking to enter, they were halted suddenly by the large goblin with the silver-hilted longsword hang from his belt as he came out from the hide flap opening. Standing nearly the height of Peyton, the goblin's yellow eyes narrowed at the sight of the humans. Shouldering his way past them, he grumbled under his breath so low that Peyton could not make out the words. The young warrior turned and watched the goblin move off away from the hut, unsure of what had just transpired. Bending low, the couple entered the hut to find a small fire burning in the center of the room with the ancient goblin chief seated nearby. The hut smelled of herbs and flowers. Small bones hung from the ceiling and several clay pots set about the room. Large, thick wicker mats set by the fire for others to sit upon. Chief Garak looked up at the pair of humans as they entered, a worried look set upon his face. The goblin tried to force a smile on his lips, but he failed completely, allowing the young warrior and Elisa to see that something bothered the chieftain. The humans took a seat on a mat beside the chief, Elisa still holding onto Peyton's hand, as if she was afraid that as soon as she released it, he would be gone. Peyton looked to the goblin. "Chieftain Garak, we would like to thank you for everything you have done. I could never repay you for having the shaman heal Elisa's leg. But if Elisa and I are causing problems for you with your people, we will move on now that she is able." The perceptive warrior spoke in the goblin tongue. Garak looked at the humans for several long seconds, his large gray eyes unreadable. "I owed a life debt to your father that I have tried to repay to you and your woman by showing you kindness and friendship." Garak raised a hand, stopping Peyton, who had opened his mouth to speak but shut it instantly, allowing the goblin to continue. "By bringing you into the tribe as honorary members, I fear I have brought more worry upon you," the chieftain finished, his tone somber. Peyton looked confused at the goblin, but turned to Elisa and began to translate his words as best as he could. The chieftain waited patiently for the young warrior to stop his translation, then said in the same somber tone, "I fear you may not leave this village alive." Grover awoke, looking at a blanket of stars cast across the night sky. His large body rolled back and forth with the pitch of the wagon as it bounced. Lying sprawled in the back of his wagon, his head throbbed in pain, and the left side of his face felt as if it was sliding off his skull. Reaching up, he felt a large amount of dried blood caked upon his horribly swollen face. Setting up the darkness crept once again into the edges of his vision, and he felt as if he was going to pass out. But instead, he vomited all over the front of himself. Head bowed in his one good hand, he had decided he had definitely seen better days. The fat man finally managed to pull himself together enough to look about, and soon he realized he was on the road about half a mile from his house, the wagon rolling on with the horse knowing the way home. Grover slid his large body toward the driver's seat, and after several tries, he grabbed the reins. Pulling hard on the reins, Grover cursed the horse till it finally stopped its slow pace. The fat man stumbled into the driver's seat. His head felt like it was 10 times the size it should be, and his ruined hand ached. He tried in vain to open his left eye, but it was so badly swollen shut there was no chance that would happen. Sitting there in the middle of the road, he thought of his next course of action. A large part of him just wanted to go home and never set eyes on a Westlake again, but his anger got the best of him. The idea hit him like one of Rand's powerful punches. If young Westlake was not at home, there was only one other place he could be, and there he would be vulnerable. No Rand to protect him. The fat man pulled the rein, causing the horse to turn around and got back the way it had come. If he traveled through the night, he should be there by tomorrow afternoon, he thought. Peyton and that girl will get what they deserve for what they have done to me, he said to the darkness as the wagon rolled on. The young warrior sat silent, not wanting to translate the last words to Elisa in fear of upsetting her. Gorthok, the goblin that just left here before you entered, is the hunt master, meaning he is the strongest, most capable hunter we have. His hatred of humans knows no bounds. Several winters ago, his 2 sons and his mate were killed by humans in the wood close to where you were found, Garrick said, never breaking eye contact with the young warrior. Elisa looked confused, her eyes darting back and forth between the goblin and Peyton. Finally, she squeezed his hand, pulling his attention to her. I know it's bad. I can tell by the look on your face, so just tell me and we will figure out what to do together, the young woman said. Her words touched Peyton, knowing what she had been through and still hold the strength to fight by his side. How could he deny her? So solemnly, he translated everything to her. The chieftain watched the two and waited patiently for them to finish before he continued. Gorthok is going to use our right of challenge to force you to battle him, one-on-one to the death. What have I done to insult or wrong him? Peyton asked the chieftain. Garrick looked at the pair of humans. Nothing. Besides being human, the village was abustle with activity preparing for the upcoming challenge. Very rarely did a challenge get issued, and never before had a challenge been issued pitting a goblin against a human. Gorthok, being nearly a legend among his people, already was quickly becoming the favored for the next chief of the tribe. Gorthok stood away back from the chieftain's hut, waiting for the humans to leave it. He had a good idea of what they would do after they spoke with the chief, and he wanted to be ready. Having hidden 6 members of his personal hunting party nearby, he felt they were ready for anything the human and his female would try. He did not want to just kill the human outright, or he would have the chief down on him, and that would mean his head. By using the tribe's own laws, he could not be touched for killing the human in the pit. The goblin slowly fingered the silver hilt of his sword. The flap opened as the humans exited the hut. They stood huddled together for several minutes. Gorthok watched intently, knowing for sure they would try what he expected. The goblin became a bit confused as he watched the human look up at the night sky and turn a few circles. Then, taking the female's hand, they started off together through the village. Gorthok whistled 2 sharp tweets. Then he joined his hunters as they moved off in pursuit of the humans. Peyton and Elisa stepped from the hut, the young warrior finishing his recount of the conversation with the chieftain. Fear crept into Elisa's mind as she thought of Peyton having to face that huge goblin on his own. Why do we not just run? We could leave the village and probably be a good way from here before anybody noticed, the young woman suggested. Peyton thought of her idea for a few seconds. Then his warrior's mind made the logical conclusion. I'm sure they would notice if the only humans in the village disappeared, but we may get far enough away they can't catch us. The warrior said, his voice a whisper. We shouldn't be too far from my uncle's farm. It's just a couple miles to the north through the woods, he finished. Peyton tilted his head back, looking at the stars, turning a few times to get his bearings, then pointed. That way's north, he said, reaching out for her hand, and together they moved deeper into the village. After several minutes, they arrived at the edge of the village. Watching the border for several minutes, they realized there were not any guards. I don't see any goblins standing guard, the warrior thought out loud. Peyton's instincts screamed for him to stop, but it was too good a chance to get out of here without having to fight Gorthok. Just as they reached the edge of the tree line, several goblins burst from hiding, fanning out before them in an arc, thrusting their short spears threatening at them. Peyton moved to step in front of Elisa to protect her, but found his way blocked by a large goblin almost his height. Large yellow eyes stared at him full of rage and malice. Gorthok stood before Peyton, fingering his silver long sword's hilt. "There is no running, or we will track you down out in the wood and kill you. If you think you just won't fight, then think again about your female and how she will fare on the end of my hunting party's spears." Gorthok growled at Peyton, his large, toothy face just inches from his. The young warrior looked past the goblin to Elisa as he tried to swallow the lump in his throat. There was no way he could take them all on without her getting hurt. The human stared into Gorthok's eyes, his mind racing, reaching for an idea, but he had none. He had no choice. He was going to have to fight the goblin on his terms. Slowly, the defeated warrior shook his head. Yes to the goblin, and the hunters backed away a little, dipping their spears' points to the ground. "Soon, human, we will meet in the pit, and my face will be the last thing you will see," Gorthok called out as he and his hunters disappeared into the wood. "Are you all right?" the warrior said to the shaking Elisa. She nodded her head, afraid to talk, not wanting him to hear the fear in her voice. She knew that he had just agreed to fight the goblin, and he had done so to save her. What she could not figure out is why this man had sacrificed so much for her. She looked at him, handsome, strong, intelligent, and very skilled, all the makings of a fine man. But she was just a slave girl. Why should such a man throw his life away for her? She carried her thoughts in silence as they headed back into the village. Sometime later, Peyton and Elisa stood at the edge of a large pit. It had to be nearly 50 foot across, plenty of maneuvering room. The warrior thought his mind, though, was not completely on the upcoming battle. He turned his eyes to Elisa. The worry on the girl's face was very clear. It pained him to hurt her more, but he had words that needed said. "Elisa." It took a second for her name to pull her from her thoughts. She turned her head to look at him, her mind racing with images of the handsome young warrior lying dead in the bottom of the pit. If something was to happen to me... The young woman's head began to shake in protest of his next words. "I want you to run. Run as fast and as hard as you can away from here. Go north till you come across a large farm. There you will find my Uncle Stevel and his family. Tell them what has happened." Peyton set his voice a somber tone. He looked over the young woman's shoulder to see 4 goblin females heading toward them. He knew he didn't have much time. "Please find my father. He will need someone to take care of him. I'm sure he will treat you as the daughter he never had the chance to have." The warrior finished. Tears filled the young woman's beautiful emerald eyes, causing them to glisten in the moonlight. Her arms wrapped around the young warrior, who held her as if this may be his last night on earth. The foursome of goblin females stopped at the humans watching the two embrace. One of them barked a few words in the goblin tongue at Peyton, who nodded to her. Turning his blue eyes back to Elisa, he reached up, stroking the side of her face. Bending his head down, he kissed her with such passion that it took her breath away. She clung to him, her legs weak. They held each other for several more seconds until the goblin barked again. He said not another word to her, just stared deeply into her tearful eyes as he was led off by the goblin females. Elisa watched the warrior being led away. She felt as if her heart was being torn from her chest. The hand touched her elbow gently, but still caused her to jump. Turning her head, she saw Chief Garrick standing beside her, his expression one of grief. Elisa knew he would stop the fight if he could, but he was bound by the laws just as they were. She was surprised at the activity around the pit. Her and Peyton had been so caught up with each other that she had not noticed the hundreds of goblins around them. Garrick held out a large hand in offering. The young woman took it, trusting the ancient goblin. She was led through the crowd of goblins to a small wooded dais where several stools set for important onlookers. The chief held out a hand, showing the human woman to a seat. Once she was seated, Garrick reached out, taking her hand in both of his. The sorrowful look in his eyes told her more than any words could have. The young woman squeezed his hand, trying to show she understood. Peyton was led to a small hut a little way off from the pit. Inside was a hole in the ground with a ladder leading down into it. Following the females, he descended the ladder into a small cave with a tunnel exit. There he was stripped of his clothing and given a long, beaded loincloth to wear around his waist. Having him set on a short-legged stool, the females began to oil his tight, muscled body and draw exotic symbols on his skin with a multiple of colored paints. Peyton's mind raced through the whole process. He paid very little attention to the goblin females as they went about their work. He looked down at his hands, still unstained with the blood of a kill. But how long could it stay that way? The path he was on now seemed to throw foes in front of him. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath in an attempt to calm his nerves. The twin straight sabers leaned against the wall of the small cave. They seemed to call to him with the glint of the candlelight twinkling off their shiny surface. The blades had once belonged to his mother, and from stories told by his father, she was a deadly and cunning warrior. Several times his father had told him that he fought just like her, quick, precise, and graceful. Thoughts of the mother he never knew pulled his thoughts in a new direction. If he fell here, some goblin would end up with his mother's blades, the ones that had been his trusted friends and allies for so long he could not remember not having them. The thought of a goblin wielding his mother's blades caused a flood of anger. His hands tightened into fist as he stood. The goblin females began to bark that they were not done yet, their guttural words falling on deaf ears as the warrior's hands wrap around the leather-wrapped hilts of the finely crafted slender swords. As he looked at the blades, calm came over him. He was finally at peace with his warrior's heart and was ready to do what must be done. Not only his survival was at stake here, so was Elisa's. Ignoring the shouts of the goblin females, Peyton started down the cave, having a good hunch that it led to the challenge pit. As he exited the cave, he was shocked there must be the entire village huddled around the rim of the 10-foot-deep pit. Peyton looked straight across from where he came out of the cave to see another opening in the pit wall. His first assumption from his inspection above was that the pit had a flat bottom, but he had been wrong. The floor of the pit rolled up and down with several little mounds, tall enough for the average goblin to crouch behind, but to him, they were useless as cover. The crowd roared in shouts and insults to the human. He did not seem to notice. Focused completely on the task at hand, Peyton watched the other opening for a sign of his opponent. These goblins were about to see something they have never seen before. Cheers erupted from the rim of the pit as Gorthok strode from the cave, his silver longsword held high in the air and a large wooden shield gripped in his left hand. Playing to the crowd, the goblin huntmaster thrust his muscled arms out wide, letting loose a loud battle cry that echoed off the pit's earthen walls. Gorthok's hate-filled yellow orbs fell upon Peyton, who stood sword tips at the ground but stared back unblinking. Chief Garrick stepped up to the edge of the dais. For several seconds he looked at the focused humans, silently saying his farewells to the kind-hearted young man that did not deserve what was about to happen to him. Raising his hands out wide, the chieftain brought them together in a loud clap and shouted, "Begin." Without any hesitation, Gorthok screamed in rage and charged as fast as he could toward the human who still stood swords hanging limp in his hands. The goblin raced over the little hills. Raising the sword over his head, he pulled the shield tight to his body. Peyton's hands tightened on his hilts when the goblin was no more than 10 short feet away. Gorthok let loose another war cry as he brought the silver blade down to cleave the human in two. Suddenly, a slender blade was blocking the attack, confusing the goblin as he had not even seen the warrior move. Peyton, using his skill and training over Gorthok's brute force, brought the sword out wide. Then, kicking out with his right foot, the warrior struck the shield, causing the overextended goblin to lose balance. Peyton felt the grip on the long sword weaken as he kept pressure on it with his blade, and the goblin struggled to stay upright. With a spin and flick of a skilled arm, the long sword shot from the goblin's outstretched hand, its hilt quivering as it sank deeply into the earthen wall. Peyton's right hand shot up his blade stop at the exposed throat of the goblin, which stood frozen by fear. The crowd went silent. The only sound was the crackle of the torches as they cast their glow over the stunned crowd. The young warrior held the goblin's gaze for several seconds. Peyton saw the fear in his eyes as he stood with the sword point resting on his throat. Looking up, the human scanned the crowd, who all shared the same stunned expressions. There is no need for blood to be spilled over race. I have done nothing to this goblin besides be human. I was not the one that killed his sons. In his hatred of humans, he has become the same as the men who killed his family, a creature that kills for no reason. So I will not kill him. I will give him a reminder that he will have to carry forever, a reminder that it was a human that spared his life. With his words still hanging in the air, Peyton pulled the blade from the goblin's throat. Faster than the eye could follow, he slashed it up through the air, slicing open the goblin's left side of his face in a long, deep, arcing cut. Blood poured from the wound as the goblin clutched his face in pain. Chief Garrock stepped forward and began to address the crowd. Gorthok has had his life spared by the human, but as loser in the pit, Gorthok is dead to the goblin people. The chief paused for several seconds, weighing his next words. Gorthok, from this day forth, you are no longer a member of the goblin people. You will be banished from this village and all goblin lands. Peyton stood in shock. He never expected Gorthok to be banished. In his effort to show him that not all humans were killers, he brought a worse fate for a goblin upon him. All he had managed to do was to bring more hatred and pain into Gorthok's life. Goblin spearmen charged from the cave surrounding Gorthok, weapon points held in a threatening manner. Gorthok lowered his still bleeding head in defeat, allowing the goblin guards to lead him from the pit, to never be seen again. Several minutes later, Chief Garrock stepped from the same cave that Gorthok had disappeared into. The chief moved to the silver blade still held fast in the earthen wall. Removing the blade, he carried it to Peyton, who stood sword points down, showing no sign of aggression. Garrock held out the blade with both hands, presenting it to the warrior. This blade will be your trophy. You have brought great honor to your people for showing mercy to one that would not have shown it to you. Tonight, you and your woman will stay here as our guests. In the morn, I will have 3 of my best hunters lead you from here. You fought bravely, Peyton, goblin friend. You will always be welcome here. Elisa was led away from the pit by 2 goblin spearmen to a small hut, where they turned and flanked both-sided of the entrance flap. After a few seconds of them staring at her, she quickly made her way inside, unsure of what else to do. A small candle burned on a short table, casting a dim glow about the small hut. Looking about, she realized she was alone. Alone and scared, she watched them lead Gorthok away after Peyton beat him. Then a short time later, he was led away too. The young woman had no idea what was happening, but several fears came into her mind. The biggest was Peyton's refusal to kill the goblin sentenced them both to death. Seating there on a large wicker mat, her head tossing image after image of Peyton's death past her mind's eye. For nearly 30 minutes, she sat there waiting for news of anything. But how would they tell her? She couldn't speak their tongue. Tears slowly began to drip from her eyes onto her hands as she sat with her head bowed. She couldn't continue alone, or confront Peyton's family, being the cause of his death. Goblin voices caught her attention outside the hut. Maybe they were coming for her. Please just let it be quick, she thought. The flap pulled back, allowing Peyton to enter the hut, his chest bare and cleaned of the markings. With just his breeches and boots on, he held the rest of his belongings, including his weapons, in a bundle in his arms. His eyes meet the young woman's, the tears still falling from them, though now tears of joy. "Oh, gods," Peyton exclaimed when he saw the anguished beauty. "You have no idea what has happened, do you?" Peyton moved to her, sitting down with her on the mat. She threw herself against him, her head resting on his chest. "I'm so sorry, Elisa. I have no idea what you must have been thinking," the warrior whispered to the still weeping beauty. Peyton began to tell her of what had transpired, but she raised a hand to his lips, placing a single finger against them. "It's fine as long as you're safe. Just hold me, please." Elisa spoke, her voice showing her weariness. Peyton laid back, allowing the woman to place her head back on his chest, and within minutes she was sound asleep. her last thought being of how safe she felt right that second, even though they were surrounded by hundreds of goblins.